All right, guys, so we're going to start the rigging process today. So your character models should be all fixed and ready to go. And so we're going to go ahead and start the project. Now, I just want to point out a lot of the sort of scripts and things that I'm going to eventually use can be found on the Week 8 folder for Astar. So if I hop into Astar here and go to our classwork folder, Week 8. In there's a variety of files that will be useful to you. I would recommend or encourage that you watch this video. So we didn't get to this last class, and for the sake of time, we're not going to cover this information, at least not formally in class. But I would recommend checking out this video that explains gimbal lock and how Euler angles work. So I'd recommend checking that out. We'll look at a couple scripts in here. So there's a color control script and a rigging 101 wire controls. These are scripts we're going to use when we get into actually setting up the controls themselves. But this will allow us to quickly create things like controllers and then color code those controllers. I'm also going to be looking at these kind of handy dandy cheat sheets in here when we start our joint layout. This will give you an idea in terms of thinking about anatomy, where to plot joints, and what to name those joints. So I'll be referring to this quite a bit, but I've provided that in case you need it. And then there's also a rigging workflow. So if you refer to this document, it just goes through the process of rigging. So all that's there for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start the rigging process by making a new project. So let's go to File, Project Window, and I'm going to do New, and we'll stick with our naming convention. So we'll go Crawl, Zachary, Rig, and we'll put this into the M drive. And hit accept. The next thing I want to do is put my geometry that I intend to rig into the scenes folder. So I've got my kid rig here. Let's see, let's copy those on over. So you'll want to put your final geometry into that scene folder. And then let's import that into our scene. So I'm going to go to File, Import. So I'm not going to open the scene, I'm just going to import it. And I'm going to do 2 rigs. You guys are only responsible for 1 rig. So initially I demonstrate 2 different character models, one in a T pose and one in an A-frame pose with legs that aren't usually or that aren't typical, just so you'll have a couple examples depending on how you've modeled your character. So again, you'll only be responsible for rigging 1, but I'm going to start with 2 different ones here. So I'm going to go ahead and import both of these. File, import, and let's go ahead and import the second one here. Now the reason why I'm importing these as opposed to opening them, I don't want to mess up the original model or the original file, so I can always have that to rely on if should I need just the geometry. For any reason, I can always refer back to that file. What we're doing here is we're creating a separate scene file just for the rig. Again, just to keep those things separate. Now, in terms of rigging, so it starts with the modeler, and usually what will happen is the modeler will hand the geometry over to the rigger, and if the modeler did their job correctly, they will typically clean up the scene. So they'll delete any unused geometry, they'll freeze transformations, they'll name absolutely everything in the scene. So again, it's their job to clean it up. So we do want to go through and clean up our geometry and just get it set up or prepared for the rigging process. Now, in terms of rigging, it's probably not the most exciting thing in the world to watch. It's probably right up there with UVing. So I just ask that you bear with me as we go through the process of rigging. It's a lot of creating joints and naming everything. Again, everything needs to be named. So we spend a lot of the time just naming those joints. It is a really frustrating process, or it can be. So I just ask that you be patient with the assignment, and know that sometimes you might have to delete something and start it all over again if things aren't working correctly and you can't figure it out. I remember the first time I rigged something from scratch, I probably spent 3 or 4 times trying to do an IK-FK switch where it just wasn't working, and I had to delete the entire arm and start it from scratch. So I do understand your pains. It was probably like a 3 or 4 a.m. morning working just on that arm. So just know it is a very technical process. And like I said, just be patient with it. Try to keep up with the lectures in class. So today we should end on the legs. And so for Friday, you guys should have your legs in place. And when I say legs, we're just doing the joints or the skeletal system. We're not doing the controllers just yet. We save those for after the skeletal system is inside of our character. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, we're going to start by checking the geometry and cleaning everything up. So we do want to go through the model and take into account what is there. So, you know, if you have any geometry that's not needed, just delete it. If you have duplicates of faces or other objects that you're not going to rig, get rid of it. You also want to consider the pose. So your character, and we double checked all these already, but your character should either be in a T-pose, like the kid here, or in the A-frame pose, similar to the goat man back there in the behind the kid. The palms, in terms of the hands, if you're in a T-pose, they should be facing down, so the bottom of the hand should be facing the ground. In terms of this A-frame pose, they're facing slightly tilted away from the body, but the palms are down. You do not want your palms facing forward or towards the camera. If that's the case, you'll need to change your model or fix the arms basically so that the hands are facing towards the ground. Your character should also be facing towards your camera. So if you're not sure what direction that's in, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of Maya here, it's actually showing you the world axis. And so Z, or this blue arrow here, always points positive forward in space. X always points right positively, and Y points up in a positive direction. So if your camera is oriented correctly, your Z should be facing you and X should be facing right. If you're still not sure, go up here to Panels, under Orthographic, and switch to the front view. And your character should be facing you. If your character is not facing directly at you, you need to rotate your character around 100, or however many degrees until they are facing the camera. A really quick way to do that, so if your character is flipped, you could just grab all the geometry for that character and then group it, and then select that group node and rotate the group node. In this case, like 180 degrees or whatever, and then ungroup it. But it looks like mine's already facing the correct direction, so we're good there. Let's see. We'll also want to check your outliner. So again, just to reiterate, absolutely everything needs to be named. I don't care if your character model is comprised of 1,000 pieces of geometry. All 1,000 geometries need to be named appropriately. And so I'm going to go over here into the outliner, and right off the bat, we've got an issue, and that's that when I imported this, what it does is it takes on a namespace. So if you look there, there's a prefix to every layer there, and what it does is it actually takes the file name of the original file that you imported, and that becomes the prefix, and then there will be a colon, and then whatever the geometry or object is named. So if you notice here, I imported a kid rig scene file, and so I've got this prefix where it says kid rig colon Theo and so forth. Same thing with Goatman. So his file was just GM. So his prefix is GM and then colon and then the name of the geometry. So to fix this, what we'll do is we'll go up here to Windows, and let's go down to General Editors and then Namespace Editor. And then here at the top in the left column, you'll have the root which is always there. And then below that, you'll have any namespaces that it's taking on from any files that we've imported. Now to get rid of this, what I'm going to do is start at the bottom of the hierarchy, so in this case, KidRig. And then on the right column, I'm going to hit delete. And then in the dialog box, I'm going to select merge with parent. And let's do this one more time with that. Now you guys should probably only have one because you're only importing one scene, but because I imported two, I'm going to go ahead and grab that GM for Goatman. I'll delete it and hit merge with parent. And then you'll notice as I deleted those, the prefix or the namespace at the beginning of all of my objects here in the outliner went away. So you'll do that until the only thing that's left is the word root. And once we've done that, we can close that out. I'll want to ungroup everything, so I want all of my objects to be separate or individual. Right now, I guess this character's name was Theo. He's in his own group here, so I do want to grab all that geometry and pull it out. A really quick way to do that is just marquee drag and select all the geometry that's visible. And then on your keyboard, the shortcut to unparent things is holding Shift and pressing P like parent. It'll unparent all those, and then I can come over here and delete that group node. We'll want to name everything, and so you'll want to be very specific. We already talked about this when we were looking at your character models last week, but you'll want to have a prefix for everything to identify what the character is. Now the reason why you'll do that is, let's say you have a scene that you're animating and you have 5 characters in the scene. It gets hard to distinguish, let's say we have 5 separate heads all modeled, and they're just called head, geo, blah, blah, blah. We won't know whose head is who if we're just looking in the outliner. So it would be ideal if we sort of personalize this a little bit based on what we're rigging. So in this case, I'm going to go through and name all the geometries for the kid. I'm going to use a prefix of kid and then name whatever the geometry is. Same thing with Goatman. Now he's a little easier because he's only one geometry. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to start here with the kid, and it looks like we have a NURB object for the eyes. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go do kid underscore, and then I'm going to do RT for right eye underscore, and then whatever the object is. So in this case, the eyes are NURBS surfaces. So I'm going to leave that at NURB. So again, you'll have a prefix identifying whatever this character is. If there are 2 of things, so if we have a left and a right, we want to specify if it's left or right, and then what it is. So this is the eye, and then what type of object it is in Maya. So this is a NURB. So we'll go ahead and we'll go through and name everything accordingly. So this is our kid underscore LT for left, I, NURB. And you want to be absolutely consistent with this as you name everything. So use the same prefix for everything. Anywhere you use capitalization, you'll want to use capitalization. Anywhere where you don't use capitalization, just be consistent across the board. So you'll notice there at the end when I have the NURB, I don't capitalize it, but everything else I do. So let's see, this is kid underscore right underscore brow poly. Now this is a character model that was used for an animation, and whoever modeled this, they chose poly for polygon. It doesn't really matter as long as it's easy to identify what it is. So poly for polygon. I typically use geo. You could also use mesh. It doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. And so let's call this kid underscore tongue poly. And I'm just going to go through the list and do the rest of these real quick. Left brow. Alright, so that's the kid all named, cleaned up, and ready to go, at least in terms of naming. Let's grab Goatman. For him, let's just be consistent. Let's name that to Poly. Oh, not Ploy. Alright, so everything's named. The next thing we'll want to do is just just make sure that our geometry is okay in terms of the normal angle. I think everybody was modeling correctly, but just double check it. I could tell right off the bat just by looking at the kid. His head, the hair, one of his eyebrows, one of the eyes, and both feet, their normals are flipped because they're rendering black. If you're still not sure, what we could do is select the geometry. So I'll just do a marquee drag and grab everything. And then if you go up here to display, and then go down to animation, or I'm sorry, polygons, and I'll tear this menu out for now. In here, there's a face normals. If you turn that on, it'll show you the normal angles for all of your polygons. And if they're oriented correctly, the face normals should be pointing outwards. So these little green lines emanating from the center of each poly face. But if we look at the head and the hair, you'll notice we don't see those normals. And that's because they're flipped or inversed. So if we go inside the head, you notice all those normal angles or faces are pointing inwards. So what we need to do is flip those, and it's pretty easy. All we do is select the object, and then let's go up to Mesh Display and hit reverse. And then all those normal angles are facing outwards in the correct direction. So I just need to do this real quick to everything that's backwards. The eye is a little different just because it is a NURBS surface, so we can't do that under the mesh menu, but we can do it under surfaces. At the bottom, we'll hit reverse direction to fix that. Now I noticed there was an issue with this in the previous class, and hopefully you guys have already fixed this if you have ingons, but I do have an ingon here in the mouth. Okay. Now it's going to be really obnoxious if I see the normal angles every time I select the geometry, so let's turn that off. We just select all the geometry again, and let's go back under the polygon display and select face normals, and it should turn those off. The next thing we want to do is delete the history. We want to look for any locked channels, and then we want to freeze and center freeze the transformations and center the pivots just to clean up all the geometry. So I'm going to grab all my geometry with a marquee selection, and I'm going to start by deleting the history first. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Delete by Type, and tear out this menu, and we're going to delete the history. We're going to delete non-deformer history. We're going to delete both channels here, so channels and static channels, and that's going to look for channels that have any kind of keys set to them. There shouldn't be any constraints, but we'll go ahead and delete. I'll just go down the list here and select everything, except for sounds. That's not really applicable here, but we'll just go through and delete everything. I might even go back once, and let's do a delete all by type. History and non-deformer history there. The next thing we'll do here is look for any locked geometry. So if I select the hair, you'll notice the translate, rotate, and scales are all locked. If they're locked, that means we won't be able to skin them. Now the reason they're locked is because I previously rigged this character and they're still locked from that process of tearing it off of the rig. So we do want to make sure that nothing is locked. Now a really quick way to do this would be to select all of your geometry, and then over here for the Translate X, I'll left click once and then drag all the way down to visibility. With all those channels highlighted, I'm going to right click and go down to Unlock Selected. And it should unlock any geometries that were previously locked. You'll also want to select all of your geometry. Now you could do this one at a time, and just look at your channel box over here, and we want to make sure that all of your transformations are frozen. So your translates and rotates should all read 0. Your scales should all read +1. So right there, I know my foot is not frozen because it has a -1 in X. Let's keep going here. I do have a tongue in here, let's see, and it's not frozen either. So let's just marquee drag and select everything. I'm going to go up to Modify and hit Freeze Transformations, and that should freeze everything. And then I also want to center the pivots of all my geometry, so I'll go to Modify and Center Pivot. And now just to double check, let's select our geometry one at a time, and everything should read 0 and 1 in the scale. And then as I select these things, their pivot points should be centered to the object that I'm selecting. So that's good. And And for some reason, the tongue will not let me delete all of its history. So I'm going to take this one and duplicate it. I'm going to delete the original. And let's take that poly tongue and get rid of that one there at the end. There, that should be good. And let's see, Goatman's good. Okay. So that's our geometry all cleaned up. Something else you want to check is the placement of your character. So you wouldn't typically rig a character like this. So Goatman, I have him positioned off center, and he's behind the kid here. So this is only for demonstration. Your character will need to be in the center axis here. So if I were to go to the front view, it's going to be in line here in the center from the front and the right side. So just make sure your character is in the center. And then you also want the feet to be on top of the center axis going along the horizontal axis here. And so it's like the feet are sort of planted or right on the ground. So again, just make sure that your character's feet, or the bottom of the feet, line up here right on top of that horizontal grid plane there in the center axis. The last thing we'll want to do is create a display layer for our geometry. And so I would recommend cleaning out or deleting any display layers you have over here, just to clean that out. And then what we'll do is select all of our geometry, and we'll create a display layer just for this. And we'll call this kid_geo layer, and we'll hit save. And this way we'll be able to toggle on and off our character's geometry, so it's not distracting when we're doing things like naming joints, things like that. I'll do the same thing with Goatman back here. Now he's only one piece, so he's pretty easy. And let's double click on that and name it. So let's call it, I'm going to abbreviate Goatman as GM_geo layer, and save that. And is there anything else that I'm forgetting? I think that's it. So the next thing I want to do is save this. So we'll be doing a lot of incremental saves. And so I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As. And I'm going to do two different saves. So for this first one, I'm going to call it Crawl Zachary _rig_start. Now the reason why I'm doing two different saves is for this start one, this is my cleaned up file. Everything's named and ready to go. And then I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As again. And this time I'm going to delete out the word start, and I'm going to do 01. The reason being is if I completely screw something up, I know I at least have a clean scene that I can always come back to if I need it. Alright, so now we're ready to start the rigging process. So I will stop here just to segment the videos, and in the next video we will look at, we'll start blocking out the spine.